Should I jump into my spiel and just get us going?
I think you should.
Absolutely. You're in
welcome
charge.
everybody. You've already seen our our speakers, but welcome to our October program, Report from the Front Lines. I'm Ann Garland, and together I'm co-chair of the Upper Valley Democrats, and together with Barb Jones, my co-chair, and Bill Seekert, the secretary, we will be moderating the program this evening. We have a terrific cast of Democratic leaders, and we're so pleased that all of you, I think we're up to 50 now, we actually had 97 sign up, that all of you will join us, and we are sure you will not be disappointed. Welcome to our speakers who are in the room, Senator Hassan, Congresswoman Kuster, and our Ward 1 Lebanon moderator, Kristin Swan. Senator Don Feltus will be jumping in a little after 7, and Executive Councilor Mike Cryans is on his way. He should float in soon. So the operative word is flexibility tonight. Quickly, housekeeping, just very quickly. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. You can put comments in the chat, but we will not look in the chat for questions because we will not be able to separate them out. So if you have questions, put them in the Q&A, and if our speakers have time, we will certainly address them. Senator, let's start with you. We're so glad you were able to jump in given your busy timetable, and I think you have the Senate vote tonight.
We do.
Yeah.
We do. So, Ann, thank you so much for all of your efforts, to the whole team for the Upper Valley Dems. Thank you so much for everything you're doing. And I'm just want to start by saying your work really makes a difference. And I have never been more grateful for grassroots support, energy, determination, and commitment. So thank you all for everything you're doing. It's great to be here with my friend and colleague, Annie Kuster, and she will be able to tell you about the House side of things. Look, as I am across the street from the Capitol right now, waiting for a vote on Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation tonight, the stakes in this election really speak for themselves. You know, instead of being together trying to craft a much needed, urgently needed pandemic relief bill, what are we doing? We are voting on a rush nomination. First time in our country's history, we're going to be voting on a confirmation of a Supreme Court justice 8 days before an election. I think in the history tells us that we've never done this after July in an election year, but we're doing this 8 days before an election. And we are doing it in the middle of a pandemic when people are telling us all over New Hampshire, all over the country, they need help. They need individual relief. They need small business relief. We need to get state and local aid out. We need to help our hospitals. We need to help our schools. We need a national testing and contact tracing strategy, a national public health strategy. But instead, here we are voting on a nominee. And, you know, a lot of my colleagues today were on the floor, a lot of my Republican colleagues saying this is about making sure we have a principled justice who will follow a philosophy, this originalism or textualist philosophy, and that's all that this is about. Well, you don't do what these guys are doing, rushing through a nomination 8 days before an election when a whole bunch of them are up for re-election. You don't do this kind of rushed work in the middle of a pandemic for abstract legal principles. You do this because Amy Coney Barrett's legal record and her philosophy tell us that she is very likely to be the deciding vote to overturn the Affordable Care Act, something that they have been trying to do on the Republican side since it was passed a decade ago. And they haven't been able to do it legislatively. We all remember that night when John McCain put his thumb down and became the deciding vote in protecting the Affordable Care Act, even though Republicans had complete control of everything. They've been trying and trying and trying, and this is their last chance. So we know that that's what is at stake here. I, like all of you, like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, like Annie, like Dan Feltus, like Mike Cryans, are candidates up and down the ticket know how important healthcare is. The pandemic has made it so clear that it's not just about each person's individual health, although that is enough of a reason to be sure to make sure that everybody has affordable quality healthcare. It's about our economy's health too. It's about our country's health too. It's about our capacity to come together and address problems. And it's in this instant and moment in time about our ability not only to contain the pandemic and work our way through it, but then build our country back and address all the disparities that the pandemic has laid bare. So that is what is at stake here. That's why your work and support is so critically important. I am blessed, like all of you, to be excited by Joe and Kamala's candidacy. I am blessed, like all of you, to know my colleagues and my fellow citizens and all the citizen legislators and grassroots activists in New Hampshire who work so hard to make sure that we are an inclusive state, an inclusive country, and understand how that helps us thrive and prosper. But the stakes have never been more clear than they are right now about the difference between Joe and Kamala's vision for our country and what we see from the Trump administration and from all of its enablers. It's the difference at the state level's never been more clear either. We are going to all need to come together to rebuild our state and our country and address the disparities. And that's what we have a chance to do in electing Joe and Kamala, in electing Annie, and re-electing Jean Shaheen, who will be casting her vote in a minute, and then I think trying to get back to New Hampshire as fast as an airplane can take her. And then, we've got to work all up and down the ballot. The Executive Council is as important this year as it has ever been, as we understand that it affects everything from a governor's nominees to the court, to the contracts the state enters into, and issues around reproductive freedom and healthcare. So we need a Democratic majority on the Executive Council. We need to sustain our Democratic majorities in the state legislature, and we need progressive people up and down our local government too. So I can't tell you how grateful I am for your work, how challenging it is to be in Washington and watch a narrow majority in the United States Senate really go against the people's will and priorities and rush this nominee through. If there was ever an example right now of what minority rule looks like, this is it. The senators who will give Amy Coney Barrett a lifetime appointment to the United States Supreme Court represent a minority of Americans, and yet they are pushing this through. So at stake is our health, our economy, and in fact, our democracy. And if you need any further inspiration other than what you see on TV and knowing the difference between a Biden-Harris administration and a Trump-Pence administration, think about this. So I mentioned that John McCain vote back in 2017 when he put his thumb down and helped save the Affordable Care Act. What I want people to remember is that back in 2016, when I defeated Kelly Ayotte, that vote margin was 1,017 votes. That night, as I sat watching everything play out on the Senate floor, I realized that if I hadn't run and you all hadn't made sure I won, the outcome would have been different because Mike Pence would have broken the tie and they would have overturned the Affordable Care Act. 1,017 votes in New Hampshire saved healthcare for 28 million Americans. That's the difference of the work that you do makes. It's phone calls right now, phone calls and phone calls and phone calls and emails and Zooms and an occasional in-person lit drop, I know. But it's critically important. And I just can't thank you all enough for doing it. I'm happy to stick around a little bit if I can. They may pull me out to get over to the vote in a minute. But just in the meantime, know how good it is to see you all on this call and how much I look forward to being back in New Hampshire and the other side of this pandemic, seeing everybody in person. Be safe, everyone.
Thank you so much, Senator. I never got around to the introduction, but
Oh,
everyone,
I'm sorry. I jumped right in.
we were running out of time and it's great. And we've had a couple of messages and I think we all share the message. Thank you for your service. It is just wonderful to know that you're sitting in there. Yep, everybody, we can't see them clapping, but I'm sure they are. So thank you so much.
Thank you all very much.
So Annie, would you like an introduction or shall we just jump into you?
I am very happy to just dive right in. You all have a long night ahead of you. Thank you, Senator Hassan, for everything that you're doing in DC tonight and trying to stand up for decency and democracy and for a process that is fair to the American people, because I totally agree with you. 8 days before an election, they are just jamming this nomination through, knowing that she will be the deciding vote to overturn the Affordable Care Act, overturn Roe v. Wade. But I think what they have underestimated is they are creating a big blue tsunami. And I think actually Mitch McConnell may get Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court, but I think the outrage heard across the land is being felt in these long, long lines of absentee voters and will be felt throughout election day. And I think you will be serving in the majority, but I'll promise you to knock on wood. Thank you for being with us tonight. I appreciate it. Thank you to Ann Garland and Barbara Jones and everyone that made this wonderful webinar happen tonight. I appreciate that. No matter where you are, I hope like me, you are feeling energized and motivated to deliver the change we need from the very top. And as the senator said, from the top on down, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Jean Shaheen, Dan Feltus, Chris Pappas, and myself, Mike Cryans, and the wonderful state legislators and senators that are running Sue Prentice and your local reps. I'm committed to giving it everything I've got, because we cannot wake up on November 4th and wish we had done more. I think Hillary Clinton said today, the coulda, woulda, shouldas, we can't do that again. So I'm humbled by the support that I've received from all of you, and I appreciate the opportunity to go to Washington to fight for granite stakers in Congress. And what we've been working on, delivering broadband to rural areas, lowering the cost of prescription drugs, protecting our environment, expanding economic opportunity, and of course, tackling COVID-19. So as we work to rebuild and strengthen our country in the wake of COVID-19, it's essential that we have policies, as the senator alluded to, that will lift up all Americans and their families, not just a few. And that's been the priority of Democrats in Congress. We have helped deliver, our federal delegation, all Democrat, helped to deliver $4.2 billion to New Hampshire. Remember that every time you hear the governor announce that he's doling out more money, it was your federal delegation that brought that to New Hampshire, supporting hospitals and healthcare workers, small businesses through the Paycheck Protection Program and the Main Street Fund, and helping struggling individuals and families. And we're going to keep following science, not politics, by expanding testing and contact tracing and making sure that we have a safe and effective vaccine so that we can distribute it equitably to all Americans and kick this pandemic once and for all. But make no mistake, the consequences of this election could not be greater for men and women across the country and right here in New Hampshire. We've seen Chris Sununu's effort to appoint an anti-choice right-wing ideologue to the New Hampshire Supreme Court, thwarted last year by the courage of Mike Cryans and his colleagues on the Executive Council. But remember that the governor has held that seat open and he intends to nominate this individual again. So we desperately need to re-elect Mike Cryans and ensure that the Executive Council has a pro-choice majority. Across the United States, reproductive rights of women are under attack, and far-right extremists are hell-bent on turning back the clock on the hard-fought progress we've made. Let me be very clear. The government has no place coming between a woman and her doctor when considering her most personal and private healthcare decisions. Unfortunately, President Trump and his far-right allies in the United States Senate have hijacked the federal courts and filled vacancies with extremist judges who are chipping away at our reproductive freedoms. Their ultimate goal is to overturn Roe v. Wade and upend 50 years of settled law regarding our privacy rights and our autonomy. It's now more important than ever before to ensure that reproductive rights of women are protected by our state courts in New Hampshire, because we just can't trust President Trump's extremist judges. That's why we have to protect our Democratic majority on the Executive Council and the State House, in the State Senate, and in the House of Representatives. So our goal is to re-elect Mike Cryans, to elect Sue Prentice to the New Hampshire State Senate, re-elect me and Chris Pappas to the House of Representatives in Washington, and re-elect Jeanne Shaheen to the United States Senate. And of course, we all know it's past time to put Dan Feltus in the corner office and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in the White House. I want to thank everyone on this Zoom tonight for your work to help elect Democrats up and down the ticket. I know that this president is asking for 4 more years. Our answer is a resounding no, and I hope we can make it 1 more week to deliver that message. So remember that you can vote early this week at your town hall, at your town clerk. You can register, you can ask for the absentee ballot, you can fill it out and hand it back in, and you will have completed your civic obligation and helped to save our country. You can also vote on November 3rd, next Tuesday, and you will be safe. We've been assured by town clerks that they will ask people to wear masks, so don't forget your mask, keep your distance, and you will be able to feel safe and again, fulfill your destiny and your democratic obligations to your community. So now I'll turn it over to Mike Cryans, and thank you again for having me with you this evening.
Can I run one question by you? Because I see Mike is still driving in the dark.
Sure.
We had a couple, but I think you've answered one. One of them is, will you be able to protect Social Security from Trump?
Thank you. Great question. And the answer is yes. We are going to have a larger majority in the House of Representatives under any circumstances next Tuesday. But I also strongly believe that Democrats will control the US Senate and the White House. So I think, but your question asks about protecting against Trump. And the answer is yes, we will be able to block any attempts that he makes to change Social Security in any way. I've been asked a number of times what it would take to make Social Security financially stable and viable. And the answer is really quite simple. We just need to raise the limit on the cap on withdrawal of wages for Social Security. And if we do that, we can make certain that Social Security will be available for generations to come.
Thank you. And it looks like Mike.
It looks like Mike is getting on board. I'm not sure where he is. It looks like he might be in a car. Mike spends more time in a car than any person I know. It's the biggest district ever in the history of New Hampshire. Mike, I was singing your praises, so I'm turning it off to you if you're ready. And good luck. I'm proud of you.
First of all, Annie, I heard you on the way. And I think Ann will know exactly where I am. I just went over the Packard Bridge and pulled into the little rest area. So I'm literally probably 2.5 miles to Ann's house, and about 4.5 miles I'll be home. So I want to pull over here and talk. So thanks for everything you've done, Annie, and thank you for your time you gave us to come up and talk about voting and getting out, because if Annie remembers, the first night we did this, it was 179,000 requests, and only 79,000 returned, 100,000 difference. Today it is, before they announce tomorrow, 200,000 requests and 140,000. So we, as of
Have
last week,
returned?
we still had 140 returns. So we still got 60,000 people as of last week, but I'm sure that number is going to come down as time goes on. So, but again,
That's
thanks
pretty
for everything you've done.
impressive. 200,000 early voters. That's very impressive.
It's an all-time record.
Well,
So I won't go on. So I know Bill's got some questions. And
welcome, Mike. You know, I wasn't going to ask you about how your gasoline bill is driving 2/3 of the state. I thought maybe the pandemic had curtailed your travel, but evidently not.
Well, I'll give you a funny little story. When I first started, probably about 3 or 4 months into it, my wife said, "Do you have to keep track of all the miles you've done?" I said, "That's the good news. I don't. I get a stipend each month." I said, "That's the good news. The bad news is I put enough miles on so far to exhaust my stipend for the whole year in the first 3 months." So,
Right.
But anyways, it's down, Bill, because of COVID. But on the other hand, tonight was a great honor. I went down and we honored 3 people in Newport for a combined 150 years of service to their community.
Wow.
Very nice. Very nice. And that's what constituent service is all about, Mike, obviously.
Yeah.
So some questions for you directly related to the Executive Council.
Sure.
First of all, what would you say is the achievement on the Executive Council that you are most proud of yourself over your last 2 years of service?
Well, I'd say there's 2 things. First of all, I think my vote, as Annie mentioned, on the Gordon McDonald vote was very important. People say it's courageous. I'd say it's the right thing. I got to know Gordon. I had nothing against Gordon personally. He's a very nice person, but I just didn't think the governor should have a third person, especially the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, coming on without any kind of judicial background. And so that vote got a lot of recognition. Some people were happy with it. Most people were happy. A few people that I know were unhappy, but that's the way it goes. The other part of it is, which is a little less noticeable, is all the help I was able to offer people that were struggling getting unemployment benefits. I'll give you kind of a scary number. 500 people applied for unemployment insurance the week before COVID. In the next 3 weeks, 119,000 people applied for unemployment. And as George Kapadas, who runs Employment Security, said, usually we have 5 or 6% that we struggle with to make it work. He said 5 or 6% of 500 people isn't many, but of 120,000 people, it's quite a few. So I literally had people that had gone 5 or 6 weeks. And one of my favorite stories, Bill, is a lady who said to me, when I was working, I didn't have much money, and I haven't got a check for 6 weeks. And, the kids are hungry, the rent's due. I mean, all of the things we can think of, any one of us, if we don't have that source of income coming in. And so that sort of a big issue with the Gordon McDonald vote, but also all those little ones that was able to help.
Thanks. Secondly, then, what's the main difference that you see between how you've represented District 1 and how Joe Kenny would if he were to get elected?
Well, I think, first of all, it's always hard to, I've never been a great one to be able to compare, but what I will say this is Joe Kenny's running around saying, we got to get a full-time person back in there like me, referring to himself. Mike Cryans is a part-timer. He doesn't give much effort to this. And when a reporter asked me about that, I said the following. I said, well, I got up this morning at 4 o'clock, went out and running, got in the car and was gone for the whole day. And when I came home at 10 o'clock at night, I better think up of a good excuse if I'm only a part-time counselor, because for the last 12 hours or 15 hours I've been out of the house. As Annie mentioned, this is a huge district. And if I'm coming home and telling my wife that I'm a part-timer, I'm sure she's going to be suspect where I am. So, I'm in all seriousness. I have worked tirelessly on this thing, and I don't say it because of me, but I had a great teacher, Ray Burton. I worked side by side with him for 16 years as a county commissioner, and I learned that constituent service in this job, there's a little saying, it goes like this: the further north you are from Concord, the more you feel forgotten. And people that live in District Number 1, I'll give you one quick mileage thing. From the Newport post office to the Pittsburgh post office, it's 165 miles. I think the state is only about 230 miles. So you can see it's about 2/3 of the length of the state pretty easily. So, you know, the only commitment I will make, Bill, is I will continue to do what I did, work hard each and every day, put myself out there. I mean, there's some issue differences. Joe would not vote for Planned Parenthood. I would. Joe has said as soon as he gets in there, and the governor has a majority, if Governor Sununu was successful, he's going to renominate, and that's the first thing they would do is get Gordon McDonald in as the Chief Justice. And, you know, I get slammed sometimes. Somebody say, well, the governor, you know, nominated this person, he got turned down. I said, the governor's role is to nominate. It's ours to vote up or down. And if we vote down, then it's up to him to nominate somebody. He's obviously keeping the slot open because he's hoping they gather and get the majority. I don't think I have to remind the people that live down here, but when I was elected, I was the first time in 54 years a Democrat had been elected to the Executive Council. The unfortunate thing, the guy that won 54 years ago did not win re-election. I'd like to be the first one ever to win re-election as a Democrat.
Okay. You've kind of touched upon this question, but what is the greatest threat that you see to New Hampshire if you aren't reelected to the Executive Council? You mentioned a couple of things already.
I guess I tried to dovetail the two there, Bill, in a way, but I think Planned Parenthood would get voted down if the Republicans were in control. Gordon McDonald would go in as the new Chief Justice. The education commissioner, the education commissioner obviously probably would be renominated by the governor. And he has been shown time and time again his issue that he would like to take more money away from public schools and put it into charter schools. So I would say that certain issues like that, but none of us know. Hey, if those are some of the things. I'm sure there'll be some things that will come up. Some of the contracts will be dealt with, and some of them probably will be voted differently than I would. But I can't tell you exactly what, because we vote on roughly anywhere from 100 to 500 contracts a meeting at times. So.
You mentioned Planned Parenthood, and Suami notes that she thinks that Joe Kenney voted against Planned Parenthood twice, at least, when it came before.
Each time it's come up, he's voted, and it'll come up again in this coming year. So yeah, he would vote against it. Yeah, no, that's his record. It's not like he is on record as saying he would vote against it. In fact, somebody sent me something they did at Kendall, and that question was asked. I've heard him ask it before, but they had it definitely in there that he would not vote for funding Planned Parenthood.
What about issues concerning public education? How does the Executive Council get involved in any way with public education?
Well, I'd say probably the two biggest, most apparent one is the approval of the Commissioner of Education and the approvals of the Board of Education. Those are probably the two biggest. We were chastised this year by some when we turned down Ryan Terrell. Ryan is African American. It had nothing to do with any type. We would call racist for doing it. I don't believe it had anything to do with that. What I believe is you don't take somebody that's recently graduated from college and put them on the most important school board in the state. You have to have some experience. And in fact, somebody threw back at me and said, well, you approved a lady that she runs one of those agencies that put people out on a temporary basis. I said, but you missed the point. She served 15 years on a school board, many of them as chairman of the school board. Experience counts. In fact, each one of us had talked to him about getting more experience. So anyways, those are probably the two biggest ones, Bill.
Yeah. What about the COVID-19 pandemic and the God help us, the opioid crisis, which we've kind of forgotten about, but is going, resurging dramatically? Does the Executive Council have any say or any influence as to what happens in those areas?
Well, the COVID, probably one of the areas, and in fairness to Governor Sununu, I called him texted him one night, and because he had given me the charge to come up with a couple of things, and I came back with putting money in the chambers, because I said, if we don't get the main streets up and running, it's going to be hard to get some of these communities up and running. But the second thing was broadband, and it is more apparent than ever that when parents are taking kids to parking lots at like McDonald's so they can get coverage, so they can do the kids' homework, or people saying, I can't get telehealth because we're still on dial-up, or our service is so slow, or we always sort of pound our chest. We got more people moving in, but young people are not going to move in if they don't have reliable and fast and high-speed internet. So that's one. I think the things I talked about with helping people that were dealing with problems with employment security, business finance. We had a number of people that if they hadn't got those business loans, those businesses would be closed now. And that's something that really concerns me going forward, Bill, is that what could possibly happen with the rise back in COVID, because I think some of these businesses are teetering, and it's concerning that some might not survive. So, I mean, look at Hanover. They lost the Skinny Pancake, Salt Hill, the Noodle Station, and the Gelato Murano in one little town. Obviously, those everybody thought you would be insulated if you lived in Hanover, and there's one town that lost a lot. I mean, you can go around to almost community after community and cite different places that have closed. So I think constituent service is heightened in the COVID. I think the other thing is, we would like to have, and maybe, and I'm fairly confident if it happens, because Dan Feltus had said if he was in charge, he would handle any money that come back into the state in a much more transparent way.
Didn't Sununu just kind of take those funds into his own hands? The CARES money? He
interpreted the money coming back in that he had total control over it. I mean, obviously, the members of the Democratic Party that were on the finance portion of the Gopher and also of the legislature, they tried to wrestle some control, but they were shot down by the courts as well.
Yeah.
So the governor has total control, and by having that, he can really put the money wherever he wants, and no one has any kind of input into it. He tells us after the fact where he put the money.
You mentioned broadband as something that certainly is related to the COVID situation with people at home, but what connection does the Executive Council have in relationship to the expansion of broadband?
Well, I think the only connection we have was he opened the door to give me an opportunity to come up with a suggestion. When I came up with it, actually, once the money, he dedicated the $50 million. That's the sad part. He dedicated $50 million to it. Part of its interpretation, some people say that the money did not have to be spent before December 31st. His interpretation, it did. Therefore, out of the $50 million bill, only $14 million actually went out because the remaining groups of people could not meet that deadline. And, $50 million would not have solved the problem, but, it doesn't take Einstein to figure this one out. 50 million would go a lot further than 14 million. So, but we don't really control it. It was just that he gave me the opportunity to make the suggestion. I came up with it, and actually, I give him credit. I'm glad we did it. I wish we could have got more money out. And I know Governor Hassan, now Senator Hassan, has said that she's going to be working to see if we can extend that deadline, because in rural district, which I represent, there are so many places that are struggling to keep, just to keep alive almost, and they would love to have the opportunity to spend that money, because it is expensive. It's expensive to, you look at $3 million goes to a community, and it's almost like negligible what it can accomplish. It really, we need that extended time, Bill.
One final question from the audience about, it's a tough one. What are your thoughts about local police involvement with federal agencies such as Immigration and Border Patrol?
I really, it's a great question. I really have not thought in that regard. It's something that's not within our purview, so I probably would be at the end of the day, probably would struggle to come up with a good answer, Bill. I mean, I think, I don't have an answer for that. I apologize.
Okay, and just one final comment. Sue Helmy again notes that one of the things the Executive Council will be approving is the next Environmental Services Commissioner. Is that correct? Is that open, that vacancy? Environmental Services?
She probably, it's an interesting concept. The governor has a 2-year term, but the people that he appoints, if he appoints somebody, or some of the people that are still in there from when, Maggie was a governor, they go for longer terms. I don't know when Bob Scott's term comes up, but the governor, whomever it is, and obviously that's the big change. There is no question Dan Feltus will look at nominees much different than Governor Sununu does. So, I'm not going to say, this person's going to get nominated or renominated, because right now our wish as a party is that Dan Feltus is successful.
Very good. Turn it over to you, Barbara.
Hi, Dan. Welcome to our meeting. It's been
great to be here.
Thank
you, Mike. Good to hear from you.
There's been a lot of talk about Dan Feltus. So would you like to, everybody knows you're a state senator, and we'd love for you to kind of introduce yourself, and then we've got questions.
Sure thing. Well, thank you so much, Barbara and Ann and Bill and Kristin and Mike. Thank you for all that you do. I appreciate it. All your activism, all your engagement, it means a lot. I serve as a state senator, a majority leader in the state Senate. I live in the south end of Concord with my wonderful wife, Erin, our 2 amazing daughters, Iris and Josie, our 2 dogs, Franklin and Roosevelt. And I have a little bit of a different perspective than the current governor. You see, my dad wasn't governor. My brother wasn't a U.S. senator. My family never gifted me a ski resort. My dad worked in a furniture factory for 45 years, the same one on air conditioned, doing the same job day in and day out for 45 years. My mom, she did part-time work, including the night shift, while raising 4 kids. And the gifts they gave to me were the values of hard work, honesty and integrity, and looking out for everybody, especially those left out and left behind. Those are the values I've tried to live my entire life. First, as a legal assistance attorney with New Hampshire Legal Assistance for about a decade, representing low to middle income Granite Staters all across New Hampshire, seniors and veterans, battling Wall Street banks who were foreclosing on folks during the last economic crisis, the Great Recession, in the state Senate for 3 terms, and as majority leader, leading the way on our issues and our values every step of the way, getting a lot done, but all too often bumping up against the same obstacle to progress in the state of New Hampshire. His name is Chris Sununu. He's seeking a rare 3rd term as governor. He set a record on vetoes, most of them bipartisan, and he calls himself, in his own words, a Trump guy through and through. And you know what? We're through with that. In 8 days, we're winning this race. We're kicking Chris Sununu out of the corner office, and we're finally moving forward on everything that we care about. And make no mistake about it, all of our issues and values are on the ballot in this race and up and down the ticket. Healthcare is on the ballot. In about 5 or 10 minutes, Judge Barrett will get confirmed to the United States Supreme Court. And on November 10th, there is a U.S. Supreme Court argument on the constitutionality of Obamacare. And for over 10 years, Chris Sununu, in fact, he launched his political career on the repeal of Obamacare. And just like Trump, he has been a firm advocate on repeal without a replacement, literally. And Judge Barrett, who Chris Sununu supported the process moving forward on, has a long history of questioning the constitutionality of Obamacare. She's going to be on the bench for that November 10th argument on Obamacare. Literally, healthcare is on the ballot in this race, and choice is on the ballot. And I happen to believe Granite Staters deserve a governor who's actually pro-choice. In 8 days, that's the governor Granite Staters will get. Chris Sununu says he's pro-choice around election time, and then all of his actions and conduct in between is anything but. A month and a half ago, vetoed insurance coverage for reproductive health care services, worked to cut off funding for Planned Parenthood, just like Trump, supports the nomination and confirmation of judges that would work to make abortion illegal, just like Trump, diverted CARES Act relief money to an anti-choice quote unquote counseling center. This is the real Chris Sununu. And so you know what? When Judge Barrett is in all likelihood part of a 5-4 majority to overrule Roe v. Wade in all likelihood, and it gets punted down to the states, you know what? Granite Staters deserve a pro-choice governor. And you know what? Chris Sununu has held open a position on the New Hampshire Supreme Court for 17 months. His conservative anti-choice activist that he appointed was voted down by the Executive Council. Thank you to Mike and others for doing that. 17 months, kept the position open, not doing his job because he wants to get reelected to a rare third term and have a different Executive Council and appoint the same conservative anti-choice activists. Well, you know what? Upper Valley Dems, when we win this race, I'm appointing a pro-choice woman to the New Hampshire Supreme Court. That's what we're going to do. And so it's not just healthcare and choice. And I know we got questions, but let me just, I'm just getting warmed up, Barbara. I got to keep going.
So Dan, you've already answered all our questions. Keep going.
We have more in the book.
It's not just healthcare and choice, Barbara. It's workers' rights. It's a minimum wage. It's paid family and medical leave insurance. It's affordable child care. It's looking out for our families in this crisis who are taking it on the chin each and every day. It's education, a real reopening plan, not punting it down to the local level, real education funding, protecting that budget that we built and building off of it, building a bigger and better and brighter future for my daughters, Iris and Josie, all of our daughters, all of our sons. That's what this is all about. That's what this campaign is all about. It's all on the line. Climate justice, racial justice, everything that we care about is on the line in this race and up and down the ticket. You know, and I mentioned our daughters, Iris and Josie. Iris is 3. Josie turned 2 a few weeks ago. They're goofy, they're strong-willed, they're wonderful, and I know that one day, many days from now, they're going to ask Aaron and I what this election was like, and what did we do? Did we lay it all on the line to win? Did we fight every last minute of every last hour for each and every one of these last 8 days? You know what? I am confident that working together with Upper Valley Democrats and Democrats all across New Hampshire and this nation, that we can answer that question to all of our kids and grandkids when they ask it, saying, yes, we did, and yes, we won. We're going to get the 4 electoral votes to Joe Biden right here in New Hampshire. We're re-electing Jean Shaheen, Annie Kuster, Chris Pappas, progressive majorities to the State House, and we're sending Chris Sununu back to his ski resort so we can finally move forward on everything we care about. So thank you so much, Upper Valley Democrats. Let's go win this thing. We have got to.
Okay, Dan, you will be able to hold your head up no matter what. Let's see, we've got questions. Dan, what are the first things you will do when elected to correct all of the current governors' vetoes and appointments?
Well, first and foremost, as I mentioned, there's an open Supreme Court position, New Hampshire Supreme Court position. It's absolutely ridiculous that the current governor kept that position open for 17 months. I mean, I'm an attorney. Leaving that spot open is just not doing his job. And so we need to move expeditiously to fill that spot. And as I mentioned, I'm going to fill it and appoint a pro-choice woman to the New Hampshire Supreme Court. So that's one thing that we got to do right away. In addition to that, we need to make sure that we manage this state budget in a way that looks out for our families, our children, working people, property taxpayers, making sure that we don't go backwards, we go forward. You know, Chris Sununu said he wants to go back to 2019 spending levels in the state budget. He literally said that. What's the consequences of that? Well, that historic education funding, which isn't enough, but that historic education funding we put in that budget, 140 million in new education funding, gone. That's what he wants to do. He wants to cut education funding, which means property taxes are going to go up. You know what? He hasn't stood up mental health services and addiction treatment services. And let me tell you that when I was a legal aid lawyer with New Hampshire Legal Assistance during the last economic crisis, the Great Recession, and Bill O'Brien, not to give people a big headache, but a guy named Bill O'Brien was in the legislature and completely decimated the state budget, using that economic crisis as an excuse. And at a time when people needed the help the most, they got the help the least. That is the exact opposite approach that we need to take. And on day one, I am not going to let that happen. We're going to manage this state budget. We're going to manage it to look out for the most vulnerable, for seniors, for children, for families, for our property taxpayers, and education and healthcare.
Okay, Dan, I was going to ask you the following question because it was the only subject you hadn't covered, but you did. I work for Grafton County Senior Citizens, and one question I wanted to know was, what are your thoughts on funding for Meals on Wheels to keep pace with the increasing need of our aging population? And I'll just add another one. What are your thoughts about mental health support for the aging in New Hampshire? You've really covered a lot of that.
Oh, thank you, Barbara, and thank you for all that you do. Look, Meals on Wheels was cut by Chris Sununu's administration over the last year and a half. We worked and backfilled it, made sure that we repaired the damage. But that's just an example of the lack of priorities. You know, not everybody can follow everything that happens in an administration. And we've done our best, you know, as chair of Ways and Means, majority leader of the state Senate, vice chair of the finance committee. We've been a watchdog and we've funded different things. We wrote the budget, but there are things that happen on a day-to-day basis that have a direct and consequential impact on the lives of ordinary folks, especially our most vulnerable. And we discovered that cut to Meals on Wheels, you know, a few months down the line. They weren't exactly advertising it to us, Barbara. And so this is fundamentally who do voters trust is going to look out for ordinary folks on a day-to-day basis. Decisions are made each and every day that have a real world impact on people's lives. And we're going to make sure that those services are fully funded. We make sure that we take care of seniors in our community with in-home support, including in-home mental health support, mobile crisis units, among others.
That's fantastic, Dan. Do we have time for one more question? Or
We have a couple in the Q&A box.
Dan, is there any chance more money can be directed for public transit providers throughout the Granite State under your administration?
Yes, I mean, I think we need to make sure that there are certain incentives in place too to do, you know, use the kind of right public transit rather than more, you know, some of the buses that and other vehicles that burn diesel or, you know, different types of highly leaded gas. So we got to make sure that we move to a clean energy economy, including with our transportation system. So, and facilitate the public-private partnerships, including with the community action agencies that are central to making sure that seniors and others have a real opportunity to live full and inclusive lives in their community and a real opportunity to go out into the community for activities of daily living like grocery shopping and that kind of thing. Yeah, we need to ramp up those partnerships.
So Rich Abel asks, where would you look for new revenue to fund the important initiatives the legislature wants to preserve and enact anew?
Well, thank you, Representative Abel, for your service and for your question and all that you do. I think first and foremost, we need to continue down the pathway of business tax reform. We did that in the last budget to a certain degree. There's a lot more that we can do. Basically, these big multi-state and multinational corporations, of which 50% of them don't pay a nickel to the state of New Hampshire. Literally. You know, they're selling products or services into New Hampshire, but they don't pay anything in our corporate income tax code. They should pay. They should pay their fair share. They're making money. They got a tangible business relationship in the state of New Hampshire. And I can tell you, as chair of the Ways and Means Committee, there are a number of these loopholes for big multi-state, multinational corporations. Part of the reason Kristin Swan vetoed that budget we worked on is part of we closed some of those loopholes for those big corporations to fund education and healthcare. And he didn't like it. He wanted those loopholes reopened and the education funding out. We said no, 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 and he ended up needing to sign basically the budget that we passed, so that he vetoed. So protecting that budget and building off of it. You know, if your last name is Sununu and or you have a big corporation, multi-state corporation, you should pay your fair share so property taxpayers don't continue to take it on the chin.
Shall we segue?
I think so. We have one more, but I think it's time for us to move on. Thank you, Dan. What a great speech.
You got it. Thank you so much for all you do. Keep fighting every last minute, every last hour, every last day. We'll get there. All right.
8 more days. Put your feet up, regardless.
Giving us
Keep at it.
2 days ago, there was a major article in the Valley News on voter safety and voter intimidation and what's being done. And we're very fortunate to have with us tonight the best poll moderator in the state, who happens to be the poll moderator for Ward 1 in West Lebanon, where I live. She's shown us the booklet that with all the rules and regulations, which is literally, I think, 2 inches thick. And the one she had was filled with various markers for all the information that she's had to absorb and be totally familiar with. So we're going to turn it over to Kristin to tell us what's been going on locally for poll safety to prevent voter intimidation. Kristin.
Sure. Thanks, Bill. I'm not sure if I'm the best yet, but I'll work toward that. This is still my first year. So we expect very high turnout in this election. And in the primary, turnout in Lebanon was twice our typical average voter turnout. We expect the same now. And as Maggie Hassan reminded us, New Hampshire has razor thin margins. And so, as the president has said, when more people vote, Democrats win. So we need everyone to vote. As the person who tallied write-in ballots in the primaries, I can tell you that a lot of Republicans wrote in Jean Shaheen as their candidate, which is great news. But a lot of Democrats wrote in Sununu in their primary ballots. So talk to your friends, encourage them to support Dan Feltus, and encourage them to show up and vote or vote absentee. And obviously the 2 big issues this year are COVID and the threat of voter intimidation and harassment. We have seen record-setting absentee voting this year, which is great news in terms of avoiding both of those issues. You can't be intimidated or harassed or get COVID if you vote from home. So in Lebanon, we have 2,600 absentee voters with 2 weeks to go. Our previous record was 900. So 2,600 is a big improvement, and we expect even more. Absentee voters throughout New Hampshire are disproportionately Democrats and independents, about 15% Republicans. So they're going to show up on election day. Election officials are working very closely with the Postal Service, both at the state and local levels, to ensure the prompt delivery of ballots. But as you've probably heard, there have been innumerable delays, slowdowns, policy changes in the Postal Service nationwide and in New England to disrupt election mail. Locally, we are assured they're doing all they can, but keep putting the pressure on to your representatives in the state government, to the governor, to the Secretary of State. If we have ballots that don't get counted because they're not here by 5 p.m. on election day, given the proportion of absentee ballots that are Democratic, that will cost us. So urge anyone who still has their absentee ballot to bring it directly to their town clerk's office ASAP. Pre-processing is going to begin this Thursday in some towns. In Lebanon, it's going to begin on Friday. So if we have those absentee ballots this week, we can get them pre-processed. And that means that if there is any problem with any of those ballots, we'll have an opportunity to contact the voters and have them remedy the problem so their votes will still count. If we don't open those absentee ballots until election day and there's a problem, those ballots will not count. So submitting them early is key. Once you do, track it on the Secretary of State's website. Make sure that your town has received your ballot by election day. If on election day your ballot is not marked as received, you can come to the polls and vote in person. If you apply to vote absentee and you receive your ballot, you can still opt to vote in the polls instead, but you have to destroy or discard that absentee ballot you received. If you've wanted to vote absentee, you submitted your absentee ballot, but on election day you change your mind and you want to vote in person, you can do that. But you have to come in the first hour after the polls open. 1 hour in, we start finally processing those absentee votes, and then you cannot change to in-person voting. But speaking of in-person voting, there are a lot of risks this year with COVID. And so the great news is the Secretary of State has secured as much PPE as every town in New Hampshire has requested. No one's been denied anything that they need. So we'll have plenty of PPE for poll workers and for voters, masks. We have cleaning supplies. We have a schedule to clean throughout the day. Every booth that gets used gets wiped down. We have space for social distancing at every polling place. We also, in the Upper Valley, have many towns with mask mandates. So we're very lucky that we see fairly few unmasked voters. In fact, in the primary, one Lebanon ward had none. We had one in Ward 1. So we are safer than a lot of other parts of New Hampshire because of those local mask ordinances. That said, we still have to accommodate anyone who wants to come and vote without a mask. And so we do, and every polling place has a secure place with a staffed ballot box that is locked, where those ballots are kept, and that's guarded throughout the day. The larger issue that we have found is persuading voters to keep those masks on once they get inside the polling place. A lot of folks went in the voting booth, pulled the mask off, or put it below their noses. So encourage everyone you know, wear a mask all the way, the whole time you're inside. Something important to know that not everyone realizes is that we can accommodate exposed or symptomatic voters with COVID on election day by having them vote absentee from their cars. So if you speak to someone who says, oh no, I was going to vote today, but I have a fever and I can't. Yes, they can. Have them wear a mask, pull up to the polling place. In my ward, I put out a sign that asks people just beep their horn twice, and we'll send out a greeter to bring them absentee ballot materials. So make sure that anyone you hear from who's afraid they can't vote at the last minute because they wake up symptomatic knows there's still a process available to them. The other big concern besides COVID is, of course, voter intimidation. And as you probably saw in the Valley News, New Hampshire law does permit armed individuals at polling places and even in the voting booths, even when they're at schools. This hasn't been an issue in the past in New Hampshire, but we know that there's greater risk this year because of the rhetoric coming out of the White House. And the Secretary of State's advice to all moderators has been to prioritize safety and de-escalation when dealing with armed voters or belligerent groups who've come to intimidate. That means a couple of things. It means, when possible, we're going to avoid direct confrontations. It means that he wants us to rely on local law enforcement, which is a mixed bag. The good news is there are multiple organizations in the Upper Valley that are training and sending election defenders to polling places to ensure fair access. I'm already in touch with a few who are working in Lebanon, which is great because they have my cell phone number. They can reach out to me if they see anything outside the library, and hopefully they've been able to get in touch with our other moderators as well. Moderators have the authority to expel poll watchers who are engaging in any kind of voter intimidation or who are making frivolous challenges. So one of the things that's been encouraged by the Republican Party in this election is for folks to come as local poll watchers and falsely or frivolously challenge voters in their own ward. That's a felony. And the New Hampshire Attorney General has asked us to contact them immediately if we see any of that activity going on, so that they will follow up. They have a deputy attorney general traveling throughout the state on election day. They have a hotline, so we have a means to deal with it. But if you or someone you know sees something shady going down, make sure the moderator hears right away so it can be addressed immediately. The other thing is that in New Hampshire, we have a small police presence at most of our polling places. It's a town by town decision, but most of the towns I've heard from have requested a single police officer to be on site. Those officers are expected to work closely with election officials. Those officers are expected to defer to the moderator. It's a double-edged sword to have police officers on site because for some individuals, just having police presence is intimidating. In Lebanon, we've been proactive about reaching out to our police force to remind the officers that their body language, when it's whether or not they realize it, could be intimidating to voters. And so we are, I've asked our poll watchers to look out for intimidating body language, but our police know that we're watching them. So even though we have unprecedented challenges this year, I think that we have great systems in place to count every absentee vote fairly, to ensure that the polling places are safe. But what's crucial is turnout so that those vote margins go the right way. And I'm happy to take any questions you have about specific poll related things.
Just one comment from Sharon Nordgren noted that you begin processing the absentee ballots on Friday, but the inside envelope isn't opened until election day.
That's right. Pre-processing just involves opening the outer envelope, making sure that the affidavit envelope is properly signed. If it's not, if there's any other irregularity with the affidavit, we can call the voter and give them an opportunity to come in and correct that defect. Often that outer envelope also includes registration materials, and those have to be processed so that we can let the voter vote on election day. The inside envelope with the ballot in it stays sealed until after an hour after the polls open on election day. And that's when those can be fully processed and they go through the voting machine.
All right, extremely thorough. And as a matter of fact, I don't think we have any other questions. Well, one person asked about, will we have a police officer stationed at each polling place in Leb? Since we have only 3 places, but you've addressed that, there will be a single officer.
Yes, just one officer. And obviously they'll call for backup if there are crowds of angry mobs with guns, but we're hoping that doesn't happen.
Right.
I had a question. I don't know if you had so much information in there, but I was asked during the week that if I have an absentee ballot and I decide a person, what do I do with my ballot? Did you answer that? I didn't.
Yeah, so if you decide to vote in person, it's just recommended that you destroy and discard that ballot. You can bring it to the polling place, but frankly, that's a kind of paperwork hassle for the moderators who then have to treat it as a special kind of ballot and have to make a record and blah, blah, blah. But if it just never gets brought to the polling place, you just destroy it.
And just to be clear, absentee ballots that have gone in, they do not get counted until the day of the election. And they get fed through the machines whenever you have a moment to feed them through the machine. So by the end of the day, they're pretty well counted in New Hampshire.
Ideally, we've never seen these kinds of numbers before. So in the primary, we were able to process all of our absentee ballots by mid-afternoon. But we had a fraction of the number that we have this election. And we also had most likely many fewer people at the polls than we expect to have. So turnout both by absentee ballot and in person overall was double what was typical. So we still expect to see a fair number of people and be quite busy at the polls. But we'll process them as quickly as we can. And if we can get it done during the day, we definitely will. That's the goal.
All right, folks.
Are there any? There's a question from maybe Bill. There are a couple of questions in the Q&A.
Oh, okay, it just came up. Question, if someone has COVID, we used to isolate paper items. Does paper ballot need to be quarantined at all?
That's a great question. The state's plan is that we feed those through the machine. The poll workers who will deal with those voters voting from their cars will have masks, they have face shields, and they'll have gloves to handle that paper with. Once it goes into the machine, it will have to be handled again when it gets taken out of the machine, but all the poll workers are continually washing and sanitizing their hands.
You've mentioned this sort of, but a question from Martha Hennessy. Do you think we'll have local state results on election night itself in New Hampshire?
I think that's going to vary by district. I think in Lebanon, almost certainly. I think that some of the larger polling places down south where the COVID numbers are higher have struggled to get as many poll workers as they would like. And that means it will take them longer to process their absentee ballots.
Great.
Ann, did you want to add something there, I thought?
Wrap up? No, I was going to wrap up if we're wrapping up.
Okay, and Susan Almy mentions that she's been asked to report the results for the New Hampshire House people. So if you still have to feed ballots after 7 p.m., could she be allowed to stay sitting near you while you finish?
Absolutely. Poll watchers are allowed to be there for as long as we're doing what we do. We finished about 10 after the primary with reconciling ballots, for what that's worth.
Great. This is terrific, Kristin.
Yeah, thank you.
Questions, but we really appreciate your coming on and being part of the program. This is our last program for 2020. We usually do not do programs in November and December. And I just wanted to remind some of you who are probably on this call, 4 years ago, after Trump was elected in November, we had a mass meeting in the library in Copenhagen to figure out what we were going to do. And out of that meeting came this Monday night series program. We started our program in January 2017, and we've had pretty well 10 programs a year for 4 years. I think we canceled one for a tornado, one for a snowstorm, and one for COVID. And otherwise, I think we pretty well made our 10 programs every year. So we really want to thank you all for participating, for coming out to the Senior Center down in Lebanon. And then we moved to Hanover, and then we moved on Zoom. We want to thank you for all your contributions that made it possible for us to keep going throughout this time. And I just you on the other side. Does anyone want to say anything about Go?
Although maybe we'll have a special celebration program, Ann, after the election.
Let's hope. Let's hope.
Yes. Okay.
Hope we have.
Okay. Well, this wraps it up. Thank you so much for attending. And there will be a video, and we'll see you on the other side. Get out.
Breath.
Good night, everybody.
Go vote.
Night, night.
Right.